back. Thanks for coming back. Oh, and now it's live. Let me start over. Hi, everyone. I got so excited. Thank you all for coming back from lunch. Um, Found a really good place near here. I don't know about you. I'm thrilled to be here on a panel about how to optimize your IG program. We were to have been joined. Richard was unable to make it today. So we're going to have a panel of one. We kind of changed up a bit. Introduce Liz Carrera. I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you know you better than I know you, and for much, much longer.
Yes, that's right, Steve. Thank you. Really an honor to be here and to be able to share a little bit about my journey and to learn. And I think we'll all get to learn a little bit about Steve as well in terms of the kind of the back and forth sort of conversation we have planned. So I have had an interesting journey. I started as a on the consulting side, more of like in a client account management space, and made a decision early in my career to jump to the practitioner side. And since then, obtained my CRM, IGP, still pursuing some more alphabet soup to go behind my name. But I'm really glad to be here. I've been with a couple different more tech side companies, organizations, and trying to evolve their RIM or records and information management sort of traditional programs into more of an information governance discipline, if you will.
And how's that going?
It's very interesting. Things change every day.
Yeah, well, that's good. Then you're not bored.
Do we want to jump into that now, Steve? And
We
or
are jumping
I
in.
figured
Just follow my lead. We told you folks it was going to be a conversation, and you should try and chime in by adding comments or questions. I'm also informed that after this, just as in a real live event in person, apparently there's a table just outside this virtual room that we can huddle at if you wanted to chat afterwards. I just found that out, and I think that's way cool. So let's take advantage of that as well. Um, I asked you, how's that going? Yeah, partly to get the conversation rolling. But it's interesting. You're like so many others who have a records background and are now doing IG things.
Mhm.
And the most immediate question that comes to my mind anyway, is everybody seems to have their own definition of what IG really is. I don't want to beat this particular horse. Well, I don't want to beat any horse, frankly. But I'm curious, given where you've come from and what you're doing, how would you relate? How would you define IG, and how would you relate it to records?
Awesome. So I don't want to, everybody kind of has the standard definition of what IG is, right? But I think maybe I'll touch on what it means for me and what it really has meant for me in my experience in the profession, and probably in the last 6 years, it's meant more than anything. It's about leadership, right? It's about elevating, whether it's your RIM program, right, your records retention program, or your privacy program, whatever involvement you had in those programs. I would say in some cases, if you're an information security professional and there's parts of that, I think that it's really about elevating those areas and bridging, right? Bridging it all together and taking the lead. And in some cases, and I think that's what I learned early on is like, well, it's records management's role to come in and take the lead. But I would argue that in the last few years, it's been quite different, right? My experience was different in that it's been more of privacy, sort of what is it? Wagging the dog, right? And then I
Yeah,
think
right, right,
depending on the environment and what's happening, it might be security, right? It might be information security that comes and says, we're going to take the lead. But ultimately, that's what IG has meant for me is being that driver and bringing the groups together, right? Having those discussions, prioritizing the efforts with everybody's goals in mind.
Yeah, good answer. This is Family Feud. Good answer.
But
Um,
argue with me, Steve. Tell me, what do you think?
oh yeah. Um, I can't really, not yet anyway. I've always looked, I won't say always. I've come to look in the last several years at IG as a very holistic kind of discipline. And you used the word discipline earlier, and that's exactly the phrase that I use. Um, Depending on the organization I'm working with and where within the organization the lead lives, I might actually call it something else. And when it comes to like information, I don't want to spend days and weeks arguing about, well, that's content, that's not data. I just call it stuff, because your stuff needs to be corralled and, to use the phrase for today, optimized. I like your use elevated. It is about all these other disciplines, and if you go across the board, each of those disciplines, when you read best practices, they're all the same with different words. I actually just posted on this. I don't mean this to be, yay, I'm smart. But I was really struck by the parallels. Like if you look at the materials for CIPP, the privacy, and you look at materials for records, and you look at, IG, it's all basically the same stuff. Form a committee, do an inventory, whatever you want to call it. You have to know what you have, and you have to look everywhere, regardless of whether you call it data or info or, as they say, stuff. And for me, even though the organizations tend, in my experience, not to understand or even sometimes respect it enough, record professionals have this discipline at their core. They understand the need to take
Right.
care of and feed information and get rid of old stuff and make sure it's the real. So I kind of lump it all under IG. And for context, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about it. I'm looking over here and I can see people in the seats, which is kind of fun. And there may well be people who have slightly different perceptions of their own, what we might mean by IG, which I can't say. So, um, having said all that, we're here really to talk about uh, dealing with an IG program. Um, Again, for level set, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about those basics of setting it up. I just rattled off a few phrases, but curious, obviously, to get your take, Liz, on it. And then really
Yeah.
talk about the optimize piece, the elevate piece, as you describe it. So to kick it off, one of the things Liz and I met the other day to kind of talk about all this fun stuff, because we're gluttons for punishment, basically. And one of the things that bubbled out of our conversation is so true, which is you likely have a lot of the pieces of this in place already. Whereupon I chimed in, and a number of you have heard me say this multiple times. I think we really do tend to make this a lot harder on ourselves than we have to. I mean, it's plenty challenging. You've got personalities to deal with, and departmental fiefdoms and all that nonsense. But really, if you look at who's in charge of your compliance and what's happening there, and privacy and data security and IT, there are pieces of this to leverage. So I love earlier when you said, Liz, that for you, IG is my condensing of what you said. It's tantamount to leadership to pull those pieces together. So
Yep.
I'm going to shut
I
up
love
now
that.
and let you describe, because you do this for a particular place, for a living. So we're all really eager to hear. Show us your scars.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Because certainly I have them, right? And you made a point earlier about aligning what we're doing and the terminology. You're right. There's a lot of different areas. I've been doing very similar things, but just calling it something else. So I'd say that at the foundation, having those discussions about what those activities are, what are we calling it, right? Aligning the nomenclature, if you will, right? Aligning it with our culture of the organization, I think is really important too. In one of my past lives, you say records or information, and when you're talking to technologists, right? They're like, what do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. I deal with data. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? So really just trying to speak their language, and I've heard this in many sessions before, right? So you're talking to IT, you have to adjust sometimes your approach. So really having that alignment at the foundation. So if we're just talking about setting things up, right? Like you said, Steve, there are already mechanisms in place, processes that you can leverage and evolve them, right? And then we'll talk about that as part of
Mhm.
optimization, right? You have a network of, let's say, records coordinators. Great. They already have been doing some degree of this work that you want achieved, right? Perhaps in a very sort of defined scope, but you want to engage them, right? You already have some level of engagement, but if you engage them in the evolution of their role, right? We're going to go from records coordinator to information liaison or information advisor, right? Whatever that might be, but that existing network is there. Take advantage of it. In some areas, they're compliance liaisons or ethics and compliance advisors, whatever they might be. But if that network exists, get in there, and really, it's about helping them also kind of do their job better. And how is this going to benefit their department, their business function, and eventually the organization. And that's where that leadership comes in. Is we orchestrated, right? We're orchestrating this coming together of our people, of our extension of our discipline or our program, right? And then providing continual education, and then and having them be part of that process. That's what I would say is a step from working with something that's at the foundation of a program and then evolving it. So making them part of that process would be one example.
Yeah, no, again, as we also discussed, we violently agree on this. Um, I'll add on by saying there's a lot of times when I'm working with organizations where I don't even try to come up with a common vernacular. Like if the records people need to call it records, fine. I do the translating in my head. If the IT people want to call data, fine. It's structured data. Oh, by the way, over there, that's unstructured data. But yeah, data is fine. Which is why over the course of the engagement, we all start saying stuff, and then I know I'm having an effect. But I'll take that metaphor and I'll extend it even across to metadata. I don't want people to have to learn new words for things that they deal with every single day. So, in terms of your comment about helping make their jobs easier, I mean, I'm a big proponent of, well, let me back up half a step. So, one of the major challenges that I run into, and you can tell me if it's true, for you, is just trying to get people on different systems to be able to look into the other systems with the right security controls in place. And because, like a compliance officer, I had a client that they have it was an energy company, and they have two major audits a year, and they know what they are and they know when they are, and two times a year, 6 weeks in advance, the person has to pick the phone and call the other departments, send me the document on exactly where it is. So like, why can't they? So I often end up defaulting to metadata for that to facilitate that kind of search. Now if that person, let's shift roles. So let's talk about a payables person. I have to pay an invoice, but the person in the department submitting the invoice to be paid, they call it a bill. If you do that search, for one, you're not going to find the other. I mean, we all know this. So that notion altogether, as people, as departments, even as technology, to me, very often boils down to something new, to do something that really doesn't change, right? So put an HTML screen in front of the thing behind the scenes, so it looks like the system in place. Well, you're going to lose productivity and time and and you're going to ignite frustration and pushback and people sitting like this. You don't know anything about what I do. So, yes, back to the leadership. I think it takes a certain set of skills, Liam Neeson, to, to facilitate all that and convene what I like to call a Congress with a little c. You get
Mhm.
represented all the different places, put them together, and you pump the air out, and nobody leaves till you come up with something. It's extreme.
Yep. Yep.
Does it
I like
resonate
that you use.
with you?
Sorry, Steve. You were cutting it out a little bit for me. I don't know if that's happening to both of us as we're speaking, but I think now we are okay. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you touched on the word Congress, and it takes me back to the comment we had about aligning to the organization's culture, aligning to the organization's nomenclature, right, and using the terms that are used by the teams, um, and and sometimes that has a lot to do with your branding, right? So that I would say that's another sort of aspect of optimizing your program, right? What's going to resonate if you're starting to bring together that Congress or that committee or that working group, right? Or that just team, whatever you're planning to call that, have that in mind in terms of the culture, what's going to resonate. Like you said, there are some terms that can be scary to people, right? I'm going to say it right now. The word governance, depending on where you are, people don't like that. Don't come in here and try to govern me, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I think it's important to be sensitive to that because if you want to show progress and um, get buy-in and support from people to do what you're driving to do, what you're orchestrating, right? That terminology does really matter. So whether that's the Congress, the committee, the working group, whatever you decide to call it,
Right.
it's a foundation, and then you can choose at some point as you're moving forward how to evolve it, right? And so I think what I wanted to say is like we're not calling our program information governance, right? We're calling it information lifecycle management, and that is a little
Yep.
bit more digestible, right, to some groups. To most groups, like, oh, I see exactly what you're trying to do. Yep, we're just managing the life cycle of the information, right? And then we're helping you to get to that sort of in the normal course of business processes. And so when you put it or frame it in that way, they're more likely to be receptive and supportive, and yeah, I'll go and listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, and in fact, the more you can turn that around, the better. Which is to say, this is what I've been charged with. How would you approach it? And then it's their idea, and you listened, even though you kind of led them. I mean, it's marketing, really, right?
Sure, to
And
some extent.
or parenting. I've often used parenting as the example. How do you get people to do something that you know is good for them that they really just don't want to do?
Yeah,
And
it's
so, if
collaborative. It has to be collaborative, right?
to a certain degree, now as a parent, you don't say things. What am I trying to say? You don't give your kid a choice unless you can live with all the choices. So whatever they pick, you get what you're after. But I do find engaging people from the get go and asking more open ended questions, even if you kind of rig the conversation a little bit, goes a tremendously long way. Because I'm not, as I've said, not here to do this to you. I'm here to do this for you. This is your opportunity to get your fingerprints on it.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean I can do everything that you want, but if I don't know what it is, then I can't. So what keeps you up at night? What's the one thing, you know, when you go home at night, you go, oh man, I wish I could just tell me what that is. So,
That's a great question to ask a risk officer.
well, yeah, I know nobody has that kind of time for the answer.
Right.
So, Yeah, I think we certainly agree, and thank you, because I definitely did not want to go down the rabbit hole of specific how to set up a committee and all that. That's different sessions on different days. But what I think is most interesting about it is how you and I, at the very least, and I know many others watching, do put a premium on that whole people side of it. Whereas a lot of clients come to me in terms of technology first. So you got to
Mhm.
monitor the technology for sure, because that'll give you ideas, if nothing else, and things that you didn't turn on that, oh, we should just turn that on. We bought it. Um, but really, without the people, you're going to spin your wheels for a long time. So, which brings me to now, let's get to the optimized part of this fun. Um, I mentioned some of the key phrases, which I'll just review again quickly. And Liz, maybe you can describe in whatever order how you've come to discover these as keys and how you approach them. Maybe you can give us some examples from either your current life or past lives about what worked, and in particular, maybe what didn't work so well, or you learned after I should have added something. So, we've been kind of using the word optimize and orchestrate and
Mhm.
engage as action words, but also when we spoke, you pretty readily listed out socialization and collaboration and orchestration. Well, that's orchestrate again, but can you talk about? I mean, when you say socialization, you're not talking about going on Twitter and saying, "Hi, we're doing this." You're talking about something else.
I'm actually quite proud that I've never had a Twitter account,
It'll make it
especially
hard to
now.
cancel.
Um, but yeah, so socialization and that's part. I'd say a key part of evolving or optimizing a program, right? Whether you're starting with just a basic or foundational, let's say records and information management policy, which for the most part everybody has historically had one of those, right? But we want to of let's say we want to make some significant updates, or you know what, maybe we need an extension of that and have a very specific personal information retention policy or privacy policy, right? Something along those lines. But really socializing the idea, and what I mean, what I think everybody understands, that that really just means having those conversations, discussions, trying to get input from your stakeholders in advance of any changes that you are trying to make, right? Before you go and make changes, what is your input? And I think, Steve, as you called it out really good, it's, provide some options that ultimately you're going to be able to live with, regardless of what direction is taken by that sort of stakeholder group, right? So having those discussions in advance, that way, when that group comes together, there, for the most part, you have an understanding of who's going to lean where. Right.
Mhm.
So but that's part of that sort of collaborative exercise as well. It's like, okay, I looks like we've all kind of met a little bit on this. This is where we are. I've put together a summary of the sentiments around this change, right? Or where we're moving with this. Um, and then there's the socialization that happens after, right? After there's been a consensus reached, right? After we've got maybe the first draft of something, and sort of sometimes that has to go a little bit below or above the level at which you started to socialize, right? So bringing in those groups, and at that point, depending on how you've framed your decision making process, you might have uh, a step to, we're socializing for awareness, or we're socializing for input, or we're socializing for this other very specific purpose in that process. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about socialization. And I think, as we discussed earlier, is the more that you are engaging the impacted teams, um, you know, the better it will be for your adoption journey, right? It's like, well, you participated in this, right? Your team participated in this change. This is how we're going to be executing this within within the organization or within. So you get a lot less pushback when you've done a comprehensive socialization exercise.
What about elsewhere in the organization? As in, not Twitter, but I find often, and it's very situational to be fair, but often there's a need to engage in real organizational behavioral change that requires socialization beyond the core team so people understand what's going on. And if there is something that they have to do differently or just be aware of, like privacy stuff, say, security stuff. I mean, everybody, so often, sort of regular employees have to take the security training, take the privacy training, the same way they would have to take the HR. I'm a big believer in making this part of the onboarding process. Even, like here's your ID badge. Here's the key to the executive washroom or the regular washroom. And here's how we handle information in this place. So there's sort of raw training, familiarity, indoctrination for current folk, but to make it part of the onboard so that over time, as people leave or retire or hit the lottery or whatever, the proportion of people who come in begin to dominate in terms of what their perspective is and their acknowledgement of duty, or whatever phrase you want to put on it.
Mhm.
Um, Often the tools there can resemble a Twitter-like thing, or Slack, or Microsoft Teams, something that's already embedded in the use of, well, just a regular, what we used to call an intranet, the company
Mhm.
portal. Have you had experience doing that or not,
Yeah.
and wishing you could have? Or
Oh, no, absolutely. So yeah, taking advantage or leveraging, I think like we spoke before, is those existing sort of platforms or mechanisms such as onboarding training, which is actually really relevant because that's what we're dealing with now, right? Is there was an existing sort of mention of information management in the onboarding training, but we've got to update it, right? It's been
right,
several years since anybody's updated. So let's take a look at that. How do we introduce privacy? How do we introduce our broader program and effort to manage information responsibly for the company, right? Like, so absolutely, that's an excellent place to set expectations, right? Is hey, new employee, this is how we do things here, right? And I think of one of our colleagues, so I think is here. I don't know if he's here because I can't see who's in our session, but Lewis Eisen, we had Lewis present to our steering committee about a year ago before I even started. And that messaging that you give people
hmm,
to set that expectation, to empower them to do things the way that is expected, right, per your policies, right? That's incredibly important, and setting that the stage at the very beginning at an onboarding is a really great opportunity. So absolutely, I would encourage those of you that are looking to evolve your programs. What is that impression that people get of your program or your function at the beginning when they first start? And can you provide a journey for them through their employee life cycle, right?
yep, yep, yep,
Like you
yep.
said, there's sometimes that annual training, annual compliance training, or a refresher. Maybe there's an opportunity to provide some refresher trainings in the learning management system or program. So really taking advantage of those things and identifying this is going to matter. This will help people do their jobs better, because always there's going to be that question, well, why are you increasing the training from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, Liz? So that was
Uh,
something that I certainly have faced before. It's like, you went from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. What is so important that we have to extend this training for? So really having the justification, whether it's compliance reasons or the privacy landscape is completely different than it was 5 years ago, right? Having that at the ready and then getting that. So that's another part of the socialization, right? Is making sure that you get the buy-in before you go make those changes, and you won't get questioned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's the best sign is if people start asking or even pushing back. That means they're engaged, and you
Sure, you're paying
learn so
attention.
much. And say, "Hey, you gave me that idea." And by the way, speaking of good ideas, I just want to echo. When I last looked, Lewis was actually in the virtual room, and he's amazing. I'm really thrilled to hear that you took advantage of that.
Shout out.
Yeah, no kidding. Woof, woof. I mean, there's
I
lots of
don't know where
extra.
you're seeing them, but I don't see
Well, I
anything.
had
I
to
just
actually
see us.
close that window because it was causing my system to misbehave. Um, Too many resources. But just as a side note, you know, there are so many people here at this event that have expertise that's worthy of tapping into, and that was a great example. And he's particularly good at that. It's like, yay. Um,
So I was going to say, let's take it in that direction. That's another opportunity for optimizing your program is who do you know out in the profession that can help you, right? I have some amazing support in consultants, and I honestly would not be able to do it without them, right? As a practitioner, and I think for many of us, uh, we have a very limited head count, right? It's
yep.
like we're a team of 2 or we're a team of 3, and you're not getting any more help as it relates to kind of full-time employees. So what can you do? Well, I'm going to bring in Lewis, and I'm going to bring in Jesse, and I'm going to bring in so and so, right? And they're going to help me build this out so that it can sustain itself when they tell me, Liz, looks like you're in a good place and your consultants can drop off and now your team of 2 or 3 can handle and manage this long term. So absolutely, when you're considering the areas where you could be enhancing your capabilities, look to your peers, look to your your professional consulting services teams, and engage them if you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. No. And as a consultant, I thank you on behalf of consultants everywhere. Um, but it is true. And there was a session earlier on this that if you weren't able to go to, y'all should find the recording and look at it. Where Jesse made a point on that, um, point. Whereas one of the things to look for in a consultant is so that you get to a point where they can drop off. Certainly for me and the folks that I hang with, and there's a group of consultants and current and past, we hang once a week to talk about stuff. And we're all agreed that it's all about serving the organization. I'd rather, as the expression goes, teach you how to fish than just keep bringing you fish all the time. Even though that'd be a good business model. You consulted. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much on that only because there was that other session, but it's a really good point. And it actually in some ways brings us to the next point I wanted to hit on, which was the collaboration piece, because so much of it, we hit a little bit on the team building and all that stuff, but especially in the case that you just laid out, there's external forces to collaborate with as well. Consultants are certainly one, and making sure that they understand really the problem my starting point is, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? Let's go from there. But you may be working with a technology vendor, and you want to make sure, and this is a little inside baseball, maybe not, but like when I help clients write their RFPs, I'm like, put it out there in terms of what you need this stuff to do, and
Mhm.
let them tell you how they're going to do it, as opposed to, oh, I need 8 scanners that run at a certain speed and can handle duplex and take this, because that's what they'll sell you. Maybe. I mean, there are plenty
Yeah.
good ones who will push back and say, I'm not sure really, like Princess Bride, right? Do you know that movie? I'm not sure that
Yes,
word
I
means
do.
what I think it means. Um, so that's a very common external resource that you need to collaborate with and ensure that they can collaborate with you. There, depending on where
Yep.
you are, what industry you're in, there may be regulators either directly or just in terms of essentially collaborating with the new law that just came out. What is that
Yep.
law? Privacy is a great example. I mean, never mind 5 months ago, 5 minutes ago, I swear there's probably something new that needs to be caught up on.
Right. Yes. It's really hard to stay on top of it. But I'd say that that's a key of engaging, right? Your professional consulting colleagues is they're going to have more often a broader perspective, right? They're going to be able to say, well, I have a client that's doing it like this, or I have a client that's gone through this experience, and this is how I helped, right? And having that additional perspective or insight is really helpful because I've been in my own little world, right, for so long, and depending on what organization I'm helping at that time as a full-time employee, I don't always have the time or maybe the attention, right, span or bandwidth, if you will, for the noise, right? There's a lot going on out there, and so I would say that's an opportunity to um, collaborate, right? And even those of us that are engaging with just other peer practitioners, which I think is very valuable, and probably one of the primary reasons why I've been involved with ARMA and AIM, et cetera. It's just so that I
Mhm.
can talk to the people that are doing what they're doing, like I'm doing, or not like I'm doing, right? And having those
Right.
conversations. So that's one aspect of collaboration that I thought we could highlight, and then also um, leveraging collaboration tools to optimize your program, right? The socializing, hey, we're working on this policy change and I'm bringing in a small or working group together to work on it together, right? We're editing it together. So definitely take advantage of those tools to engage and get maximum sort of participation and diversity of thought, I would say, in what you're trying to do. Um, and then I think also from a collaboration standpoint, maybe for another time we would talk about how we will control all of the information in our collaboration tools. The whole other session we
Yes,
could do on that someday.
but it's a good point because as Nick Inglis and I and others used to say in the good old days, everything is information.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, do you need to still have it? I had a client, we were going through, basically, we were doing an information inventory and found, I can't tell you how many hundreds of baby pictures somebody put on the server because they just had a kid. They were excited. And that people, oh, show me a picture. They're like, well, that doesn't really belong there, does it? And the client was shocked to discover it because they're sure they have it. So
Mhm.
even through that little story, and I got one other I want to share quickly to illustrate how well the pieces come together, I think. So we talked about socialization, and we talked about collaboration. Then I started to think about, it's easy to say, sometimes it's really hard to do. And I know of one case where the company was putting in these sorts of stuff management. I don't want to call it information governance. Um, I do, but those are charged words, as we've discussed. Um, and there was a guy he was at the company for like 30 or 40 years and nearing retirement. And it wasn't a law firm, by the way, although you see this sometimes there too. He's just so used to doing things his way, didn't trust the new tools. I'm speaking from a client experience in a law firm. Many are more progressive. One guy was making copies of the stuff before he gave it to the records, the case management people to file properly because he didn't trust it. It's like, oh, excellent. Anyway, the team leader made a point of seeking out this individual to say, look, may sound like a lot. I really want to understand where you're coming from, what you do, and what that moment is. And the guy eventually opened up, and a lot, of course, of what the lead was trying to do already was addressing those issues. But by doing that, this guy was fully on board. And beyond that, Liz, I think you'll get a kick out of this. The guy was so on board that he was talking to other people about it. And as part of the change management initiative, they actually made him a poster child, put his face on a placard on the multiple floor. The company was doing it kind of floor by floor, and they put his picture and his testimonials publicly around the office spaces. And I
Amazing.
thought that I wish I'd thought of all that. I wish I'd done that. I had a tangential piece to it, and I thought that's how you do it. Because the rest of the company ended up thinking, well, if George can do it, if he's on board, then well, okay, that guy doesn't
Yeah.
like anything.
That's a great sort of example or use case of optimization, right? Of your program is find your champions. Find those champions who you were able to help, right? You make their lives easier with this new process or this new, technology solution, and have them be your voice, an extension of your department or your program to drive things forward and I hear this a lot and with consulting actually is help move the needle, right?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
you
yeah.
found the champion and making him that poster child, and everyone's like, I'm going to ask him because he seemed to be kind of a set in his ways, and now he's all about this new way of doing this. So absolutely, that's a great example, Steve.
Yeah.
Do we have to do questions, or do we?
Well, we have
Because we have a couple
about four and a
minutes.
half minutes left. I was just going to say the same thing. Great minds or misery loves company. I'm not sure which. I don't see any, at least in the chat that I can see. So I'll stretch for just a moment. Oh, I don't want to forget. And then if you do have questions, let's go to that outside table.
Oh, let's
Outside,
do that.
we'll do that. But I'll put you on the spot, Liz, because you thought this might be possible. So sorry, I didn't ask you before we went on the air here. You have a worksheet you said you developed and might be willing to share, just
Sure. I don't
as a
have to.
template for people to. It's more than just a checklist because you can begin making
So
notes on it. I thought it was great.
absolutely. Happy to, maybe we can work with Nick on how to make it available for those who are
Yeah. Okay.
interested. So I recently delivered a session on, socialization methods, right? And really to optimize your program, whether it's IG or records management. Um, or risk management, right? Whatever that program is that you're trying to drive forward, or even if it's just an activity or a project. So I created a collaboration and socialization planner, and it's just a way to organize yourself, right? What is your idea, initiative, or project? What is the problem you're trying to solve, right? As Steve indicated earlier, or what is this opportunity, right? Maybe things are working just fine, but there's a way to optimize or enhance it. And
Right.
what is it that you're trying to do? It walks you or guides you through who you should be talking to, helps you identify, of course, your stakeholders in those groups. Why is this important to them? Not just why it's important to you. And then how do you identify common goals? So it's really just a worksheet or checklist for you to kind of organize yourself as you're preparing to embark on this journey of socializing and getting buy-in and support for what you're trying to achieve. So happy to share it at some point, but I have delivered a whole session on it before, and I thought it went well. So happy
Yeah.
to
No, it's
make
it's
that
really
available.
good. We're coming to the end here. Let me suggest this. Certainly, we'll work with Nick to see about how making this available, how to make this available to everyone. But let me close by saying thank you all for listening in right now. Liz, you were amazing. I knew you would be. Um, if let me suggest this. If you have another question or you want to talk a little bit more on the side, yes, we'll go to that table just outside the
Mhm.
virtual room. But if we can get the tool to work, which I suspect we can, Liz, maybe you can show people
Sure.
that template out in at that table, and then we'll figure out how to actually make it downloadable or whatever. That's Nick's department.
Sounds great.
Is that good?
Thanks for
Okay.
steering our bus today, Steve. Thanks so much, everyone, for your attention today, and hope to talk soon.
We'll see you on the go-kart track. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Steve.